The unforgiving sun beat down on the cracked earth of the Badlands, a relentless hammer forging the horizon into a shimmering mirage. This was a land that offered no second chances, a truth Abigail Kane knew in the marrow of her bones. A solitary woman carving a life from the unforgiving soil, she was as weathered and resilient as the gnarled cottonwoods that clung to the dry creek beds. One sweltering afternoon, while tracking a stray calf, a sight snagged her attention, a dark, circling congregation in the sky. Vultures, and beneath them a small, still form. What she found would not only test her own hardened heart, but would irrevocably bind her fate to a people she had only known as whispers on the wind, the Lakota. The year is 1876. The air in the Dakota Territory is thick with tension, a simmering pot of distrust between the white settlers clawing at the land and the Native American tribes who have called it home for generations. This is the story of a woman who dared to defy the unspoken rules of her time. A woman who, in saving one life, found herself at the center of a prophecy she never could have imagined. This is the story of how Abigail Kane, a lone rancher with a haunted past, became the unexpected voice for a future she did not choose, but one that would ultimately define her. Prepare for a journey into the heart of the Wild West, where survival was a daily battle and the deepest connections were forged in the crucible of unimaginable hardship. This is the voice of the Ghost River. The stench hit her first, the cloying, metallic scent of death already beginning to bake under the oppressive Dakota sun. Abigail Kane. A woman whose features were as stark and unyielding as the landscape she inhabited, urged her bay mare Jasper forward. Her Winchester rifle, a familiar and comforting weight, rested snugly in its scabbard. She was no stranger to death. It was a constant companion in these parts, a silent partner in the dance of survival. But the circling vultures, their black forms, stark against the bleached blue sky, signaled a fresh kill, and her gut tightened with a familiar cold dread. Her small ranch, a lonely outpost of civilization carved out of the vast rolling plains, was miles from the nearest town of Deadwood. The isolation was both a blessing and a curse. It offered solitude a shield from the prying eyes and judgments of a society she had long since renounced. But it also meant that help was a luxury she could not afford to expect. She was her own law, her own doctor, her own protector. As she crested a low butte, the source of the vulture's ghoulish vigil came into view. It wasn't a stray calf or a wounded deer, as she had suspected. It was a child. A small boy, no older than 6 or 7, lay sprawled on the parched earth, his buckskin tunic torn, and his face turned towards the unforgiving sky. He was Lakota. The intricate beadwork on his moccasins and the single hawk feather tied into his long black hair told her that much. A wave of cold apprehension washed over her. The proximity of the boy to her land was a dangerous complication. Tensions between the settlers and the Lakota were at a fever pitch. The recent discovery of gold in the Black Hills, a sacred place to the Sioux, had brought a flood of prospectors and opportunists, each one carving a deeper wound into the already fragile peace. Abigail dismounted, her movements fluid and practiced. She pulled the Winchester from its scabbard, her thumb resting on the hammer. The vultures, emboldened by her approach, hopped closer to the boy, their bald heads and beady eyes fixed on their intended meal. A guttural growl rumbled in Abigail's chest. "Get!" she snarled, her voice a raw, rasping sound that had been shaped by years of shouting at stubborn cattle and the relentless wind. She fired a shot into the air, the crack of the rifle echoing across the plains. The carrion birds, startled, launched themselves into the air, with a clumsy flapping of wings, their indignant squawks, a protest against the interruption of their feast. She approached the boy cautiously, her eyes scanning the surrounding terrain for any sign of movement. Where were his people? A lone Lakota child was an anomaly, a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture of a tribe known for its fierce protection of its young. He lay unnervingly still, his small chest not seeming to rise or fall. His skin, the color of rich earth, was dry and cracked, his lips swollen and blistered. He was desperately dehydrated, if not already gone. Kneeling beside him, Abigail gently placed her calloused fingers on his neck, searching for a pulse. For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Then a faint, thready flutter against her fingertips. He was alive. Barely. A strange, unfamiliar emotion flickered within her. A protective instinct she thought had been buried long ago, along with the memories of a life she had fled. With a grunt of effort, she gathered the boy into her arms. He was lighter than he should have been, a fragile bundle of bone and sinew. His head lolled back, his eyes closed, his face a mask of silent suffering. As she lifted him, something fell from his clenched fist, a small, smooth grey stone, worn and polished by countless touches. She tucked it into her pocket without a second thought, her focus solely on the fragile life in her arms. Getting him back to her ranch was an ordeal. She couldn't risk riding with him. The jarring motion of the horse might be too much for his weakened state. So she walked, leading Jasper with one hand and cradling the boy in the other. The sun beat down on her sweat, stinging her eyes and tracing rivulets through the dust on her face. With every step she cursed the vast empty land, the same land she had once sought for its solace. Her ranch was a modest affair, a small sturdy cabin built from cottonwood logs, a barn and a corral. It was a testament to her sheer grit and determination, a fortress against the harsh realities of the frontier. She carried the boy inside the cool dimness of the cabin, a welcome relief from the blinding sun. She laid him on her own bed, a simple cot with a straw-stuffed mattress, and then set to work with a practiced efficiency. She fetched water from the well, her movements urgent but controlled. With a soft cloth, she gently cleaned the boy's face, wiping away the grime and dust. She moistened his lips, a drop at a time, watching for any sign of a swallow. For a long time there was nothing. She was about to despair when his throat convulsed, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He was taking the water. A sigh of relief escaped her, a sound as dry as the plains themselves. For the next several hours, Abigail tended to the boy. She brewed a weak broth from a piece of dried venison, forcing a few spoonfuls between his lips. She bathed his fevered brow with cool water, her touch surprisingly gentle for a woman whose hands were more accustomed to the rough grip of an axe handle than the soft skin of a child. As she worked, she studied his face. He had high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a thick fringe of black lashes that rested against his sun-darkened skin. He was a beautiful child, and a deep, aching sadness settled in her chest as she wondered about the mother who was surely grieving for him. As dusk fell, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, the boy's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of dark, polished obsidian, and for a moment they were unfocused, clouded with confusion. Then they landed on Abigail, and a raw, primal fear flared in their depths. He tried to scramble away his weak limbs, trembling with the effort. "Easy now, child," Abigail said, her voice softer than she had intended. "You're safe here." The boy stared at her, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound came out. He pressed his lips together, a look of intense frustration and terror on his face. He tried again, his small body tensing with the effort, but still only silence. Abigail's heart sank. The boy was mute. Whether by birth or by trauma, she didn't know. But his silence was a gaping void, a chasm that separated them more completely than any language barrier. How could she comfort him? How could she learn his story? She remembered the smooth grey stone she had found in his hand. She pulled it from her pocket and held it out to him. "Is this yours?" she asked, her voice gentle. The boy's eyes widened when he saw the stone. He snatched it from her hand, his small fingers closing around it with a desperate possessiveness. He clutched it to his chest, his dark eyes fixed on her, the fear in them slowly being replaced by a cautious curiosity. The days that followed were a strange, silent dance of cohabitation. Abigail went about her daily chores, tending to her small herd of cattle, mending fences and cultivating her meager garden, with a new constant awareness of the small, silent presence in her cabin. The boy, whom she had started to call Tashunka, a Lakota word for horse she had picked up from a trader, followed her like a shadow. He watched her every move with an unnerving intensity, his obsidian eyes taking in everything. He refused to stay in the cabin alone, a silent, stubborn insistence that Abigail found both exasperating and endearing. He would sit on the porch steps while she milked her cow, his small hands clutching the grey stone. He would follow her to the creek when she went to fetch water, his bare feet making no sound on the dusty ground. She tried to talk to him, filling the silence with stories about her life, about the faraway city she had left behind, about the stars that blanketed the night sky. She spoke of her own loneliness, a confession she had never made to another living soul. The boy would listen, his head cocked to one side, his expression unreadable. He never made a sound, but sometimes when she spoke of her own long-lost family, she would see a flicker of understanding, of shared sorrow in his dark eyes. One evening, as a thunderstorm rolled in across the plains, the boy was startled by a sudden clap of thunder. He let out a small, strangled gasp, the first sound Abigail had ever heard him make. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with terror, and ran to her, burying his face in her worn skirt. Abigail froze, her hands hovering in the air. It had been so long since she had held another person, so long since she had offered comfort. Slowly, tentatively, she rested a hand on his head, her fingers sinking into his soft black hair. "It's all right, Tashunka," she murmured, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "It's just the sky talking." The boy didn't pull away. He stayed there, clinging to her as the storm raged outside the rain, lashing against the cabin walls. In the flickering light of the lantern, Abigail looked down at the top of his head, a fierce, protective love blooming in her chest, a love that was as unexpected and as powerful as the storm itself. She knew that this fragile peace could not last. She knew that his people would be looking for him, and she knew that when they came, they would not see a woman who had saved a child. They would see a white woman, an intruder on their land. The thought filled her with a familiar, cold dread. But as she held the silent boy in her arms, she also knew that she would not give him up without a fight. He was a part of her now, a silent, beautiful echo of a life she thought she had lost forever. The silence in her cabin was no longer empty. It was filled with the presence of the mute Lakota boy, a silence that was louder, more profound than any scream. And Abigail Kane, the woman who had sought solace in isolation, found herself more connected, more vulnerable, and more alive than she had been in years. The calm before the storm was over, and the real drama was about to begin. The arrival of the Lakota was not the violent, thundering charge Abigail had always feared. It was a silent, almost spectral appearance, as if they had materialized from the very dust of the plains. One morning as the sun painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold. She stepped out of her cabin, a bucket of milk in her hand, and froze. They were there, a line of warriors on horseback, their figures silhouetted against the rising sun. They sat motionless, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on her cabin. At their head was a man whose presence was as commanding as the land itself. He wore a magnificent war bonnet of eagle feathers, each one a testament to his bravery and leadership. His face, weathered and stern, was a mask of authority. This was a chief. Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, deafening silence. Her first instinct was to run, to grab her Winchester, to barricade herself inside the cabin. But then a small hand slipped into hers, and she looked down to see Tashunka standing beside her. The boy who had been so silent and withdrawn now stood tall. His small shoulders squared, his eyes fixed on the man in the war bonnet. A flicker of recognition, of longing crossed his face. The chief's eyes, as sharp and piercing as a hawk's, shifted from Abigail to the boy. A muscle in his jaw twitched, the only sign of the emotion that must have been churning within him. He dismounted, his movements deliberate and powerful, and began to walk towards them. The other warriors remained on their horses, their stoic silence, a heavy, watchful presence. Abigail's grip on the boy's hand tightened. She stood her ground, her chin held high, her fear a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She had faced down blizzards, droughts, and the threat of starvation. She would not be intimidated now. The chief stopped a few feet in front of them, his gaze sweeping over Abigail, taking in her worn dress, her calloused hands, her defiant stance. Then his eyes settled on Tashunka, and a profound sadness. A deep, aching grief softened his stern features. He spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet. The words were in Lakota, a language she did not understand, but the meaning was clear. He was speaking to his son. Tashunka did not respond. He simply stared at his father, his small face a mixture of emotions, relief, fear, and a deep, unspoken sorrow. He clutched the grey stone in his other hand, his knuckles white. The chief's gaze shifted back to Abigail, his eyes narrowing. He spoke again. This time, his tone was sharp, demanding. He was questioning her, accusing her. "I don't understand," Abigail said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. He was alone. "Vultures, they were going to..." She trailed off the words, inadequate to describe the horror of what she had found. One of the warriors, a younger man with a face that was a canvas of conflicting emotions, dismounted and stepped forward. He spoke in broken English, his voice laced with suspicion. "You... take... boy. I saved him." Abigail corrected her voice, firm. "He was near death. He would have been... gone, if I hadn't found him." The chief listened, his expression unreadable. He looked at his son again, his gaze lingering on the boy's silent, upturned face. He then looked at Abigail, a long, searching look that seemed to penetrate to the very core of her being. He saw the defiance in her eyes, but he also saw the genuine concern, the fierce protectiveness she felt for the boy. He spoke again in Lakota, his voice softer this time. The young warrior translated. He asks, "Why you help?" The question hung in the air, a simple inquiry that held the weight of a century of mistrust and bloodshed. Why had she, a white woman, an intruder, helped a Lakota child? Abigail looked at Tashunka at his small hand, still clinging to hers. "He was a child," she said simply, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't hide. "He was alone. That's all that mattered." The chief's stoic facade seemed to crack for a moment. He saw the truth in her words, the simple, unadorned humanity of her actions. He had expected to find a captor, a monster. He had found a woman who had shown his son a kindness that his own people had been unable to provide. The story, as it unfolded through the halting translations of the young warrior, was a tragedy of misunderstanding and misplaced trust. The chief, whose name was Wanbli, which meant eagle in their tongue, had been away on a hunt. His wife, Tashunka's mother, had been ill a fever that had swept through their camp. A white man, a trader named Silas Croft, had offered them medicine, a foul-smelling liquid that he had promised would cure the sickness. But the medicine had only made her worse. In a fit of delirium, she had wandered away from the camp, taking Tashunka with her. By the time Wanbli returned, his wife was gone and his son was missing. They had found her body a day later by the Ghost River. She had succumbed to the fever, her body ravaged by the so-called medicine that was nothing more than a potent and ultimately deadly concoction of raw alcohol and laudanum. Of Tashunka, there had been no sign. They had searched for days, their hope dwindling with each passing sunrise. As Wanbli spoke, his voice choked with grief. Abigail's blood ran cold. Silas Croft. She knew the name. He was a disreputable character who ran a trading post on the edge of the territory, a man known for his greed and his utter lack of scruples. He had a reputation for selling whiskey and watered-down goods to anyone foolish enough to trade with him. The thought that he was responsible for the death of Tashunka's mother filled her with a cold, righteous anger. Wanbli's gaze fell on the grey stone clutched in his son's hand. He spoke a single word in Lakota, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and reverence. The young warrior translated. He says, "Wakan," sacred. The stone Wanbli explained was a Wakan Tanka, a sacred object passed down through generations of their family. It was said to hold the spirit of their ancestors, to offer guidance and protection to the one who carried it. Tashunka had never been without it. The fact that he had managed to hold on to it through his ordeal was a sign, a powerful omen. The chief then did something that stunned Abigail into silence. He reached out and gently touched his son's cheek, his calloused fingers tracing the curve of the boy's face. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his own weathered cheek. Then he turned to Abigail, his hawk-like eyes locking with hers. He spoke his voice low and solemn, and the young warrior translated his own voice, filled with a sense of disbelief. He says, "You have saved the future of our people." Abigail stared at him, her mind reeling. What? What does he mean? Wanbli spoke again, his gaze unwavering. He says, "The boy, Tashunka, he is not just his son. He is the last of his line. His mother, she was the last of her family. The boy, he carries the blood of chiefs. He is the future of our Ghost River band." Abigail felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The weight of his words was staggering. She had not just saved a child. She had saved a legacy, a future. "But why me?" she stammered. "I am a stranger." "You are more than a stranger." The warrior translated his voice, filled with a newfound respect. "You are the one who heard his silent cry. You are the one who saw him when his own people could not find him. The spirits, they led you to him. They led him to you." Wanblee then made a declaration that would forever alter the course of Abigail's life. He declared that she, Abigail Kane, the solitary white woman who had sought refuge from the world, was now under the protection of the Ghost River Lakota. He declared that she was to be his son's voice, his advocate, until the boy's own voice returned. He believed that the trauma of his mother's death and his own near-death experience had stolen his son's ability to speak, but that it would one day return. Until then, Abigail was to be the bridge between his son and the world. He declared that she was Aye-Wakan, the sacred voice. The pronouncement was met with a mixture of awe and skepticism from the other warriors. An outsider, a white woman, given such a sacred responsibility, it was unheard of. But the chief's word was law. Wanblee, a man of deep spiritual conviction, believed that the spirits worked in mysterious ways. He saw Abigail not as a threat, but as an instrument of a power greater than himself. Abigail was speechless. She had sought isolation, a life free from the complexities and entanglements of human connection. Now she found herself at the very center of a drama that was far more profound and far-reaching than she could have ever imagined. She had saved a mute Lakota boy from Vultures, a simple act of human compassion, and in doing so, the chief had declared her the voice of their future. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its unforgiving light on the unlikely trio, the stoic chief, the silent boy, and the bewildered woman, a new and uncertain chapter began. The shadow of the hawk, the spirit of the eagle, had cast its long and powerful reach over the small, isolated ranch of Abigail Kane. And she knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating that her life would never be the same. The silence that had once been her refuge was now a sacred trust, a responsibility that would test the very limits of her courage, her compassion, and her understanding of the world. She thought she knew. The Wild West had a way of rewriting destinies, and Abigail's was now inextricably linked to the fate of the Ghost River Lakota. The weeks that followed Wanblee's declaration were a period of uneasy adjustment, a delicate dance of two cultures colliding on the dusty plains of Abigail's ranch. The Lakota did not leave. They set up a small, temporary camp, a respectful distance from her cabin, their teepees a stark, conical contrast to the angular lines of her homestead. They were a constant, silent presence, a reminder of the new and extraordinary circumstances that now governed her life. Wanblee was a frequent visitor, his imposing figure often appearing at her doorstep at dawn, his face a mask of stoic concern. He would watch his son, a silent vigil that was both heart-breaking and unnerving. Tashunka, for his part, seemed to exist in a world of his own, a silent observer of the strange new reality that had been thrust upon him. He remained by Abigail's side, a small, constant shadow, his hand often finding its way into hers, his grip a silent affirmation of the bond that had been forged between them in the crucible of his rescue. The responsibility of being Aye-Wakan, the sacred voice, weighed heavily on Abigail. How could she be a voice for a boy who could not speak? How could she bridge the chasm of culture and language that separated her from his people. She was a woman of action, not of words. Her hands knew the language of survival, the feel of an axe handle, the heft of a rifle, the texture of the soil. But the language of diplomacy, of prophecy, was foreign to her. Her attempts to communicate with Tashunka were a series of frustrating failures. She would point to objects, speaking their names in English, but the boy would only stare at her with his dark, unreadable eyes. She tried to teach him to write, but he showed no interest in the strange, angular symbols she scratched onto a piece of slate. He seemed content in his world of silence, a world that was both a prison and a sanctuary. The only thing that seemed to break through his wall of silence was the grey stone, the Wakan Tanka. He would hold it for hours, his small thumb tracing its smooth surface, his lips sometimes moving as if he were whispering secrets to the inanimate object. Abigail watched him, a sense of awe and a growing unease warring within her. What was the secret that the stone held? What was the unspoken truth that lay buried in the heart of the silent boy? The twist came from an unexpected source, not from the stoic warriors or the grieving chief, but from one of the Lakota women. Her name was Wiyaka, which meant feather. And she was an elder, a woman whose face was a roadmap of a long and difficult life. She had watched Abigail with a sharp, intelligent gaze, her initial suspicion slowly giving way to a grudging respect. One afternoon, as Abigail was mending a fence, Wiyaka approached her, her movements slow and deliberate. She spoke no English, but she carried a small pouch made of soft deerskin. She opened it and emptied its contents into her wrinkled palm, a collection of small, colorful stones, each one painted with a different symbol. She pointed to a stone painted with the image of a hawk, then to the sky where a lone hawk was circling overhead. Then she pointed to a stone with a wavy blue line, and then to the creek that ran through Abigail's land. A spark of understanding ignited in Abigail's mind. The stones were a form of communication, a language of symbols. She looked at Wiyaka, a question in her eyes. The old woman nodded a slow, knowing smile, creasing her lips. For the next several days, Wiyaka became Abigail's teacher. She would point to objects and then to the corresponding stone, her gnarled fingers guiding Abigail's hand as she learned to decipher the intricate symbols. Abigail was a quick study, her mind accustomed to the practicalities of survival, readily grasping the logic of the symbolic language. She learned the symbol for tipi, for horse, for fire, for water. And she learned the symbol for wakan, a circle with a dot in the center, the symbol of the Great Spirit, the sacred mystery at the heart of the Lakota world. Armed with this new knowledge, Abigail approached Tashunka with a renewed sense of hope. She sat with him on the porch steps, a collection of painted stones spread out between them. She pointed to the stone with the symbol for horse, and then to Jasper, who was grazing in the corral. Tashunka's eyes widened, a flicker of interest in their dark depths. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out and picked up a stone, the one with the symbol of a woman with long hair. He held it for a moment, his small hand trembling, and then he looked at Abigail. His eyes filled with a profound and heartbreaking sadness. He then picked up another stone, one painted with the image of a river, and placed it next to the woman. He looked at Abigail, his meaning clear. His mother, the river. Abigail's heart ached for the boy. He had been carrying the story of his mother's death, within him a silent, heavy burden. The stones had given him a way to share his grief, a way to break through the wall of silence that had imprisoned him. Over the next few days, with the help of the painted stones, Tashunka began to tell his story. He told of the sickness of his mother's delirium, of their frantic flight through the wilderness. He told of her collapse by the river, of his own desperate attempts to find help. He told of the vultures, of his terror, of his slow, agonizing descent into unconsciousness. But there was another part of the story, a part that he had kept hidden, a secret that was even more terrible than the death of his mother. He picked up a stone with the symbol of a man, a white man. Then he picked up a stone with the symbol of a snake. He placed the snake stone next to the man stone, his small face contorted with a mixture of fear and anger. Abigail's blood ran cold. The snake, the symbol of treachery, of deceit. Tashunka then picked up the stone with the symbol of the woman, his mother. He placed it next to the snake man. Then he took the stone with the symbol of the river and placed it on top of the woman. His meaning was chillingly clear. The white man, Silas Croft, had not just given his mother bad medicine. He had been there. He had been at the river. A new, more sinister interpretation of events began to form in Abigail's mind. Silas Croft, a man known for his greed, his ruthlessness. Had he followed Tashunka's mother? Had he seen her collapse? Had he, in his avarice, seen an opportunity? Tashunka then did something that sent a shiver down Abigail's spine. He picked up the stone with the symbol of a necklace, a beautiful ornate necklace of turquoise and silver. He placed it next to the snake man. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Tashunka's mother had been a woman of some standing, the daughter of a chief. She would have worn jewelry symbols of her status, a turquoise and silver necklace, a valuable prize for a man like Silas Croft. The unspoken truth was finally revealed, not in words, but in the silent language of the stones. Silas Croft had not just been a purveyor of poison. He was a murderer. He had found Tashunka's mother weak and delirious, and had likely robbed her, leaving her to die by the river. And he had seen the boy, the only witness to his crime. This was the reason for Tashunka's muteness. It was not just the trauma of his mother's death, but the terror of what he had witnessed. He had seen the face of evil, and it had stolen his voice. Armed with this terrible knowledge, Abigail knew she had to act. She was Aye Wakan, the sacred voice. It was her duty to speak the truth, to seek justice for Tashunka and his mother. She went to Wanbli, the painted stones clutched in her hand. With Wiaka by her side to help her translate, she laid out the stones, recreating the story that Tashunka had told her. As Wanbli listened, his face grew darker and more thunderous with each stone that was placed on the ground. The grief in his eyes was replaced by a burning, righteous anger. The accusation was explosive. To accuse a white man of murder was a dangerous act, one that could ignite the already simmering tensions between the settlers and the Lakota into a full-blown war. But Abigail was undeterred. The image of Tashunka's small, terrified face, the memory of his silent, agonizing grief, fueled her determination. Wanbli, a man of great wisdom and restraint, knew that he could not act on impulse. He needed proof, something more than the silent testimony of a traumatized child. He looked at Abigail, his hawk-like eyes searching her face. He saw not a reckless vigilante, but a woman of deep conviction, a woman who was willing to risk everything for the sake of justice. He made a decision. He would go to the nearby town of Deadwood, a lawless, chaotic place filled with prospectors, gamblers, and gunslingers. He would go to the white man's law, a concept that was foreign and often hostile to his people. And he would take Abigail with him. She would be his voice, his advocate in a world that was deaf to the cries of his people. The journey to Deadwood was a perilous one, a journey into the heart of a world that was hostile to everything they represented. They traveled under the cover of darkness, a small, determined band. Wanbli, Abigail, and a handful of his most trusted warriors. Tashunka was left in the care of Wiyaka, the old woman's wisdom, and the comfort of his own people, a shield against the dangers that lay ahead. As they rode across the dark, moonlit plains, Abigail felt a strange sense of destiny settle over her. She had sought a life of solitude, a life free from the entanglements of the world. But the world had found her. It had come to her in the form of a silent, traumatized boy, and it had given her a purpose, a voice. She was no longer just Abigail Kane, the solitary rancher. She was Aye Wakan, the sacred voice. And she was about to speak a truth that would shake the very foundations of the Wild West. The drama was no longer just about a saved child. It was about a fight for justice, a quest for truth, and a woman who had found her voice in the heart of a silent world. The final act was about to begin, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of them all. The journey to Deadwood was a descent into a world that felt both alien and hostile. They rode under the cloak of a slivered moon, a small, grim procession moving through a landscape that seemed to hold its breath. Wanbli and his 5 most trusted warriors, their faces painted for a battle of a different kind, were a silent, formidable presence. Their stoicism was a shield against the palpable animosity that seeped from the very ground as they neared the white man's domain. For Wanbli, every mile was a concession, a step into a realm governed by laws that had only ever brought his people sorrow and betrayal. Yet he rode on his resolve, as solid as the black hills that loomed in the distance, his faith placed in the unlikely vessel of the woman beside him. Abigail felt the weight of that faith with every beat of her heart. She was no stranger to the raw, chaotic energy of towns like Deadwood, but returning now as an advocate for the Lakota, she saw it through new eyes. The flickering lights of the distant settlement were not a promise of civilization, but a beacon of the very greed and prejudice that had led to a mother's death and a child's silence. She clutched the reins of her mare. Jasper, her knuckles white. She was their voice, the Aye Wakan. The title felt like both a crown and a cross, a sacred honor and an unbearable burden. The silence between her and Wanbli was not empty. It was filled with an unspoken understanding, a shared purpose that transcended the vast canyon of their 2 cultures. They were heading into the lion's den, armed with nothing but the truth. Deadwood. When they finally entered its muddy, chaotic main street, was even more of a cesspool than Abigail remembered. It was a town in the grip of gold fever, a festering wound on the face of the plains. The cacophony was overwhelming, the tinny plink of pianos from a dozen saloons, the raucous laughter of drunken prospectors, the sharp crack of a distant gunshot, the incessant haggling of merchants. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. A Lakota chief, in full regalia flanked by his warriors, was a sight that stopped traffic and conversation. Faces peered from saloon doors and windows, eyes filled with a mixture of fear, hatred, and morbid curiosity. Whispers followed them like a foul wind. Savages! Hostiles! What are they doing here? The venom in the words was a physical force pressing in on them. Abigail felt a cold fury rise within her. She lifted her chin, meeting the hostile stares with a gaze of pure, unadulterated defiance. She was not just a woman on a horse. She was an emissary of justice, and she would not be cowed. They found the office of Marshal Seth Bullock, a small, sturdy building that seemed like an island of order in a sea of chaos. Bullock, a man whose formidable presence was as much a part of his authority as the Colt peacemaker strapped to his hip, looked up as they entered. His eyes, accustomed to sizing up men in an instant, took in the scene with a practiced impassivity, the imposing chief, the stoic warriors, and the hard-faced woman who stood before them. He listened, his expression unreadable, as Abigail laid out the story. She spoke clearly and concisely, her voice never wavering, presenting the facts, as Tashunka had revealed them through the silent language of the stones. She did not plead or embellish, she simply bore witness. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the small office. Bullock leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning in protest. He stroked his thick moustache, his gaze moving from Abigail to Wanbley and back again. "That's a hell of an accusation, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Silas Croft is a weasel, I'll grant you that. He'd sell his own mother for a plugged nickel. But murder, that's a tall tree to climb." "The boy is the only witness," Abigail stated. "A mute Indian boy." Bullock countered his tone, not unkind but pragmatic. His testimony, even if he could give it, wouldn't be worth a spittoon full of sawdust in a Deadwood court. You know that. "His mother is dead," Wanbley said, speaking for the first time. His English was heavily accented, but clear and powerful. The marshal, who had been focused on Abigail, turned his full attention to the chief. "My son saw the man with the snake's heart. He took her spirit stone." "Her what?" Bullock asked. "A necklace," Abigail clarified, seeing the confusion on the marshal's face. "A valuable one, of turquoise and silver." Bullock's eyes narrowed slightly. Greed. That was a motive he understood. It was the lifeblood of this town. Still, it wasn't enough. "I can't arrest a man on the word of a child's story, Chief, no matter how much I might want to. I need something solid. Something a jury can see and touch." He looked at Abigail, a long, searching gaze. "I'll tell you what. I'll ask around. I'll put the fear of God in Croft. But unless you can bring me something more, my hands are tied." The search for that something more led them to the source of the poison, Silas Croft's trading post. The place was a den of grime and desperation, smelling of stale tobacco, cheap whiskey, and unfulfilled dreams. Croft, a portly man with a perpetual sheen of sweat on his florid face, reacted with a predictable, blustering indignation when Marshal Bullock began his questioning. "It's a lie, a slander," Croft sputtered, his shifty eyes darting around the room. "I sold the squaw an herbal tonic, that's all. A kindness. This is what I get for trying to help these people. They turn on you, Marshal, like rabid dogs." While Bullock kept Croft occupied, Abigail moved through the trading post, her senses on high alert. She was not just a rancher anymore. She was a hunter, and her prey was the truth. The place was cluttered with a motley assortment of goods, overpriced sacks of flour, rusty mining equipment, shoddy blankets, and bottles of rot-gut whiskey. Her gaze scanned the shelves, the customers searching for a glimmer of turquoise and silver. And then she saw her. In a corner, pretending to admire a bolt of calico, was a woman whose flame-red hair and garishly painted face were a beacon of faded glory. Around her neck, resting against the cheap fabric of her dress, was a necklace that stole Abigail's breath away. It was a masterpiece of silver and turquoise, intricate and beautiful. A piece of art that was utterly out of place in this grimy establishment on this forlorn woman. It matched the image Tashunka had formed with the stones perfectly. Abigail approached with the quiet grace of a predator. She didn't look at the necklace, but at the woman's face. "That's a lovely color on you," Abigail said, nodding towards the calico. The woman, Clementine, startled. She looked Abigail up and down, a flicker of professional appraisal in her tired eyes. "Think so? I do," Abigail said, her voice warm. "A woman should have beautiful things, like that necklace. It's truly stunning." Clementine's hand flew to her throat, her fingers caressing the stones. A genuine, proud smile broke through her painted facade. "Ain't it just it was a gift from a very generous gentleman?" "He must think very highly of you," Abigail probed gently. "Mr. Croft," Clementine confided, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He can be a real charmer when he wants to be. Said he came by it in a trade. From an Indian woman. Said she was past needing it." The casual cruelty of the words, the utter lack of empathy, sent a chill down Abigail's spine. It was the final damning piece. The trial was a spectacle that gripped Deadwood. The courtroom was packed, a tense, sweating mass of humanity, divided along racial lines. On one side sat Croft's cronies and the town's prejudiced majority, their faces set in grim, defiant lines. On the other, a smaller, more somber group, a few sympathetic townspeople. Marshal Bullock's deputies and Wanbley and his warriors, who sat with a regal and unnerving stillness. The prosecution, led by a young, ambitious attorney, presented its case. Clementine, looking nervous and out of place, testified about the necklace. Croft's blustering denials now sounded hollow and desperate. But the core of the case, the emotional and moral center, rested on Abigail. When she took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom, with Wiaka standing beside her as a cultural interpreter and a symbol of her bond with the Lakota. Abigail knelt on the floor. She did not speak at first. She simply opened a deerskin pouch and let the painted stones spill onto the rough-hewn wooden planks. Then she began. "This is a story," she said, her voice clear and strong, reaching every corner of the room. "It is not my story. It belongs to a boy who lost his voice. I am only its keeper." One by one, she picked up the stones. She showed them the symbol for mother, for son, for sickness. She laid out the stone for the snake man, Silas Croft, and the bottle of poison he called medicine. Her narration was spellbinding. She wasn't just presenting evidence. She was weaving a tapestry of grief and betrayal. She made the jury see the frantic mother, the terrified child, the desolate riverbank. When she finally placed the turquoise necklace sewn next to the symbol for Croft, and then covered the mother stone with the river stone, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. She had made them feel it. The silence she spoke of was now a living, breathing entity in the room. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, painting her as a lonely, hysterical woman who had been manipulated by the savages. But Abigail's quiet dignity was unshakable. Her connection to the Lakota was not a weakness. It was the source of her strength. The final moment, the one that would be etched into the memory of everyone present, came from the silent witness himself. Tashunka had been brought into the courtroom, sitting quietly beside Wanbley. He had remained impassive throughout the proceedings, his small face a mask of trauma. As Silas Croft was being led from the witness stand, his face slick with sweat after a grueling cross-examination, he passed the spot where the Lakota sat. For a fleeting second, his gaze met Tashunka's. In that instant, something broke inside the boy. He shot to his feet, his small body trembling with a rage that seemed too immense for his frame. His hand shot out his finger, pointing directly at Croft. His mouth opened, and a sound tore from his throat. Not a cry, but a primal roar of anguish and fury. Then came the word, A single explosive word that shattered the courtroom's tense silence. Wana tai. The Lakota word for snake or ghostly deceiver ripped through the air. It was a condemnation, an exorcism. He then followed it with the English word he had heard in his nightmares, the word that had haunted his silence. Snake. The impact was seismic. It was a voice from the grave, a truth-given sound. Women in the gallery wept. The jury members, hardened men of the frontier, stared, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The lie had been suffocated by the pure, unadulterated power of a child's resurrected voice. Silas Croft visibly crumbled the last of his composure, dissolving into pathetic, whimpering fear. The guilty verdict was a formality. Justice, for once, had prevailed. As they prepared to leave the town that had nearly swallowed them whole, one Blee stood before Abigail. The rising sun casting a golden light upon them. The animosity of Deadwood seemed a distant memory. He held out the beautifully adorned deerskin dress. "The sacred voice must be clothed in honor," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond mere gratitude. "You did not just give my son back his voice. You gave our people a small piece of our own back. You made them listen." The ride back to the ranch was different. The land no longer felt empty. It felt like home. The silence was not one of loneliness, but of peace. Abigail looked at Tashunka riding beside his father. His small face turned towards the future, his hand clutching the Wakantanka stone. She had gone into the darkness and faced the snake. And in the echo of a single spoken word, she had found not just justice but redemption, her own and that of a people who had claimed her as their own. The solitary rancher was gone. In her place was Aye Wakan, a woman whose voice would forever be a part of the Song of the Plains. The story of Abigail Kane and the mute Lakota boy, Tashunka, is more than just a tale from the Wild West. It's a powerful testament to the extraordinary impact of a single act of courage and compassion. It's a reminder that even in the most hostile of environments, a bridge of understanding can be built, a voice of justice can be heard, and a future of hope can be forged. Theirs is a legacy etched not in stone, but in the hearts of two cultures forever changed by an unlikely bond. If this story of bravery, resilience, and the fight for justice resonated with you, please consider giving this video a thumbs up to help us share it with more people. Don't forget to share it with your friends and family who appreciate real-life dramas that inspire and move the soul. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from the annals of history. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the past. Thank you for listening.